At my promotion party, my wife whispered to her friend, "I'm only staying until he gets the inheritance." She didn't know the CEO standing behind her was my godfather. He tapped her shoulder and said 6 words that ended her plan. Have you ever stood on the precipice of what you thought was the greatest moment of your life, clutching a crystal flute of vintage champagne that cost more than your first car, surrounded by a sea of people who are applauding your success, only to realize that the person standing closest to you, the person whose hand is resting possessively on your arm, is actually holding a knife pressed against your ribs, waiting for the perfect moment to slide it between the bones? That specific, suffocating dissonance between public triumph and private rot is the feeling that defined the night of my promotion party. A night that was supposed to be a coronation, but ended up being an execution, though thankfully, not mine. I was standing in the penthouse suite of the Dominion Tower. The city lights sprawled out below us like a carpet of diamonds, celebrating my ascent to senior vice president of the firm my grandfather had helped build, a position I had worked 18-hour days for a decade to earn. The air smelled of expensive lilies and ambition, a scent that usually intoxicated me. But that night, underneath the joy, there was a low hum of anxiety that I couldn't quite silence, a frequency emanating from my wife, Vanessa. She looked stunning, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her like a second skin, playing the role of the supportive, adoring wife to perfection, laughing at the right moments, touching my arm with a practiced intimacy that signaled to the room that we were a power couple. But I knew the texture of her touch had changed. It had gone from warm to calculating, the grip of a climber checking her handhold before pulling herself up to the next ledge. I was so desperate to believe the lie, to believe that the coldness I felt at home was just stress or grief over my father's recent death, that I ignored the way her eyes didn't meet mine when she smiled, focusing instead on the heavy antique watch on my wrist or the signet ring on my finger, the tangible symbols of the inheritance she had been asking about with increasing frequency. To understand how I missed the blade until it was pressed against my skin, you have to understand the masterclass in manipulation that was our courtship, a whirlwind romance that swept me off my feet at a time when I was most vulnerable. We met 5 years ago in a coffee shop near the hospital where my mother was receiving palliative care, a low point in my life where I was walking around with an open wound, desperate for anyone to help stem the bleeding. Vanessa was a pharmaceutical rep, or so she said, radiant and bursting with a vitality that seemed to recharge my drained batteries just by being in her proximity. She didn't recoil from my grief. She leaned into it, listening to me talk about my family legacy, my fears of not living up to my father's name, and the immense pressure of the trust fund that I was set to inherit but wanted to earn. Looking back, I see the interrogation masked as empathy, the way she cataloged the details of the estate, the summer homes, and the corporate structure, filing them away not out of interest in me, but as due diligence on an investment. She moved in within 6 months, a seamless transition where she slowly upgraded my life, replacing my comfortable, worn furniture with sleek, uncomfortable designer pieces, swapping my old friends for networking opportunities, and convincing me that these changes were part of my maturation into the man I was destined to be. I was so grateful to have someone organizing the chaos of my life that I didn't notice she was actually erecting a fence around it, isolating me inside a gilded cage where she held the only key. The dynamic of our marriage shifted subtly, but undeniably the moment the ring was on her finger, a transformation that was easy to dismiss as the end of the honeymoon phase, but was actually the mask slipping. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a demanding expectation of lifestyle maintenance. She quit her job a month after the wedding, claiming she wanted to focus on supporting my career and managing our social calendar, which really meant spending my salary on galas, vacations, and a wardrobe that rivaled a Hollywood starlet's. She became the curator of my existence, dictating where we went, who we spoke to, and most importantly, how hard I worked. She pushed me relentlessly to climb the corporate ladder, not because she cared about my professional fulfillment, but because she viewed my stagnation as a threat to her bottom line. When I would come home exhausted, needing comfort, she would offer a cold shoulder and a lecture on ambition, telling me that if I wanted to be the head of the family, I had to act like it, weaponizing my insecurities against me. But the true toxicity surfaced when my father's health began to decline rapidly last year. While I was drowning in the sorrow of losing my hero, Vanessa was obsessed with the logistics of his passing. She would ask questions about the will over breakfast, wondering aloud if the portfolio would be transferred immediately or if there would be a probate period, her eyes gleaming with a avarice that made my stomach turn. Though I shoved the nausea down, telling myself she was just being practical, just trying to secure our future because she loved me. The breaking point, the crack in the foundation that I tried to spackle over with denial, came during the week of my father's funeral, a time when I needed her to be my rock and instead found her to be a ledger. My father, a man of immense wisdom and kindness, had never fully warmed to Vanessa, a fact that caused friction between us. But on his deathbed, he had held my hand and whispered that I needed to watch my back, a warning I dismissed as the delirium of a dying man. After the funeral, when the reality of the estate's complexity set in, the lawyers explaining that the inheritance was tied up in a complex trust structure that would only release fully upon my attaining the CEO position or turning 40, whichever came first, Vanessa went into a rage. She threw a vase in our living room, screaming that it was unfair, that we had plans, that she she couldn't wait another 2 years for the payout. I remember standing there, numb with grief, watching my wife mourn the delay of money rather than the loss of a man, and for the first time, the terrifying thought crossed my mind that she might leave me. I didn't know then that leaving was exactly her plan, but she was too calculated to leave empty-handed. She needed a bridge to her next life, and my inheritance was the toll she intended to collect. She pivoted quickly after that outburst, apologizing profusely, blaming the stress, and redoubling her efforts to push me toward the promotion. Knowing that the title of senior vice president was the trigger for a partial release of the funds, the promotion party was her masterpiece, a lavish event she had planned down to the last napkin, inviting the city's elite, the board of directors, and every person who mattered in our social circle to witness my ascension and, by proxy, hers. She had spent a fortune of my money on the venue, the catering, and her dress, creating a stage where she shone as the perfect executive wife. I felt like a prop in her production, a cardboard cutout of a husband that she moved around the room to shake hands and smile. The guest of honor, in my eyes, wasn't me, but Marcus, the CEO of the company and my godfather, a man who had been my father's best friend since college and who had stepped in as a surrogate father figure after his death. Marcus was a titan of industry, a man of few words and terrifying intellect who saw everything and forgot nothing. He had flown in from London specifically for this night, a gesture that meant the world to me. Vanessa, in her arrogance, had never bothered to learn the depth of our connection. She knew him only as the CEO, the man who held the keys to my promotion and thus her money. She treated him with a fawning, superficial charm that I could see bored him, unaware that he had been watching her for years with the cold, assessing gaze of a predator tracking a pest. The atmosphere in the penthouse was reaching a fever pitch, the champagne flowing freely, the noise level rising to a roar of congratulations and networking. I had been separated from Vanessa for the better part of an hour, trapped in a corner by a board member who wanted to discuss quarterly projections, and I found myself scanning the room, needing to anchor myself with her presence, still desperate for her validation. I spotted her near the balcony doors, holding court with her best friend, Jessica, a woman who was equally materialistic and whom I had never liked. They were huddled together, heads bent close, holding their wine glasses, laughing in that conspiratorial way that usually meant they were mocking someone. I extricated myself from the conversation and began to make my way toward them, intending to wrap my arm around her waist and kiss her, to share a moment of genuine celebration amidst the artifice. The room was loud, the jazz band playing a frenetic set, and as I approached them from behind a large marble pillar, they didn't see me. I paused for a second to adjust my tie, and in that brief moment of stillness, the music lulled, and her voice carried through the gap in the noise, sharp and clear as a bell. "God, Jessica, relax," Vanessa was saying, taking a long sip of her wine, her body language loose and dismissive, stripped of the adoring wife act. "It's not going to be forever. I can endure his boring stories and his pathetic neediness for a little longer." I froze behind the pillar, the blood draining from my face, my hand hovering midair where I had been about to reach out to her. Jessica laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. "But how long, Van? You said 2 years ago you were done. You're going to waste your prime pretending to love a sad sack." Vanessa turned slightly, her profile illuminated by the city lights, a look of utter contempt on her beautiful face. "I'm only staying until he gets the inheritance," she whispered, but it was a stage whisper, loud enough to tear my world apart. "The trust releases $5 million when he takes this title, and the rest when he turns 40. Once the wire hits the joint account, I am filing for divorce. I've already consulted a lawyer in Cayman. I'll take half, plus alimony, and I'll be on a beach in street." Tropez, while he's crying into his spreadsheets, he has no idea. He thinks I'm his soulmate. It's actually pathetic how easy he is to manipulate. The physical sensation of heartbreak is not a metaphor. It is a violent, visceral event, a feeling like a sledgehammer hitting the center of your chest, shattering the ribs and leaving you gasping for air that suddenly feels too thin to sustain life. I stood there, paralyzed, my brain trying to reject the data it was receiving, trying to rewind the tape and hear something else, but the words were branded into my mind. Pathetic, easy to manipulate, only staying until he gets the inheritance. The last 5 years, the coffee shop, the late nights, the nursing of my father, the vows, it was all a long con. I was not a husband, I was a mark. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I thought I would vomit on the expensive marble floor. I wanted to run, to flee the building and disappear, to hide my humiliation from the hundreds of people who were currently drinking my champagne. But before I could move, before I could crumble, I saw a shadow detach itself from the wall near the balcony, a figure that had been standing quietly in the dark, smoking a cigar, just feet away from where Vanessa and Jessica were plotting my destruction. It was Marcus, my godfather, the CEO. He stepped out of the shadows, looking like an avenging angel in a tuxedo, his face a mask of terrifying, glacial calm. He didn't look at me. He was looking directly at the back of Vanessa's head. He took a slow drag of his cigar, exhaled a plume of gray smoke, and then walked forward. He didn't shout. He didn't cause a scene. He simply tapped Vanessa on her bare shoulder with a single heavy finger. She jumped, spinning around, spilling a splash of red wine onto her dress, annoyance flashing across her face until she realized who it was. The mask slammed back into place instantly, a dazzling, fake smile plastering over the contempt. "Marcus!" she exclaimed, her voice pitching up an octave. You startled me. We were just talking about how proud I am of. But Marcus cut her off. He didn't let her finish the lie. He looked her dead in the eye, his gaze boring into her with the weight of a man who could buy and sell her entire existence 1,000 times over. Vanessa, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, silencing the immediate area. You are fired. Vanessa blinked, confused, her smile faltering. Excuse me? I don't work for the company. Marcus, you can't fire me. Marcus took a step closer, invading her personal space looming over her. I am not firing you from a job, he said, his voice cold enough to freeze oxygen. I am firing you from this family. I am firing you from this marriage. And I am firing you from the future you think you have secured. He paused, letting the words sink in, watching the color drain from her face as she realized he had heard everything. Then he delivered the final blow, the 6 words that ended her life as she knew it. He gestured slightly toward the pillar where I was standing, trembling in the shadows. And he knows every single word. Vanessa's head whipped around, and her eyes locked with mine. In that second, she saw the devastation, the realization, and the cold, hard wall of closure slamming down. She saw the husband die, and the stranger take his place. David, she stammered, taking a step toward me, reaching out a hand. David, wait, it was a joke. We were just venting. You know how girls talk. I stepped out from behind the pillar, my legs feeling like lead, but my spine stiffening with a sudden, surging rage. Don't, I said, my voice cracking but loud enough to be heard by the board members who were now turning to watch the commotion. Don't you dare come near me. I heard you. Pathetic. Sad sack. Only staying for the inheritance. It's over, Vanessa. Get out. The silence in the room was absolute now, the band trailing off, the guests freezing with their glasses halfway to their mouths. Marcus turned to the security detail standing by the elevator. Escort this woman out of the building, he ordered. She is trespassing, and ensure she takes nothing but the purse she is holding. The walk to the elevator was a gauntlet of shame for her. She tried to bluster, tried to scream that she was my wife, that she owned half of everything. But the security guards were professionals who moved her with efficient, irresistible force. Jessica, the enabler, scurried after her like a rat fleeing a sinking ship, heads down, avoiding eye contact. When the elevator doors closed, cutting off her screams, the room let out a collective breath. I stood there, swaying, feeling the adrenaline dump leave me shaking. Marcus walked over to me, placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, and squeezed. I'm sorry you had to hear that, son, he said quietly. But better a painful truth today than a fatal one tomorrow. We will handle this. The legal team is already drafting the paperwork. She won't see a dime. I looked at him, tears finally spilling over, and nodded. I realized then that while I had lost a wife, I had regained a father. The fallout was a scorched earth legal war that lasted for 18 months. Vanessa didn't go quietly. She sued for everything, claiming emotional distress, claiming I had entrapped her, claiming the prenuptial agreement was invalid. But she had underestimated Marcus. He unleashed the full power of the firm's legal department, a team of sharks who smelled blood. They ordered a forensic audit of her finances during our marriage and found that she had been funneling money to a secret account for years, accumulating credit card debt in my name, and most damningly having an affair with her personal trainer, which broke the infidelity clause in the trust agreement she had been so desperate to access. The inheritance she wanted was protected by layers of ironclad legal armor that my father had put in place specifically for a scenario like this. She walked away with nothing but her personal effects and a bill for her own legal fees that would take her a lifetime to pay off. The divorce almost broke me. I had to sell the penthouse, unable to live in the space where the illusion had shattered. I moved into a smaller, quieter apartment near the water, stripping my life down to the essentials. I went to therapy to unpack the years of gaslighting, to learn how to trust my own perception of reality again. It was a dark, lonely time, but it was also a time of profound clarity. I realized how much of my life had been a performance for her benefit, how much I had hollowed myself out to fit into the mold she created. I started reconnecting with the old friends she had driven away, apologizing for my absence, rebuilding the bridges she had burned. I focused on the work, not for the money, but for the legacy my father and grandfather had built, finding a new purpose in stewardship rather than ambition. It has been 5 years since that night at the Dominion Tower. I am the CEO now, having taken the reins when Marcus retired last year. I run the company differently than my predecessors. I prioritize transparency and integrity, values that were tested in fire. I am remarried to a woman named Sarah who is a teacher, a woman who drives a 10-year-old car and has never asked me about my trust fund, a woman who holds my hand when I have nightmares and loves me for the man I am, not the check I can write. Marcus is still a constant presence in my life, the grandfather to my newborn son. We sat on my porch last weekend, drinking cheap beer and watching the sunset, and I asked him if he regretted doing it so publicly. He smiled, a rare expression, and said, "A weed needs to be pulled by the root in broad daylight, David, so it knows never to grow back." I look back at the man I was that night, the naive, desperate, lonely man in the tuxedo, and I feel a pang of pity, but mostly I feel gratitude. I am grateful for the pillar that hid me. I am grateful for the cruelty that revealed her, and I am grateful for the 6 words that saved my life. You are fired, and he knows. They were the end of a lie and the beginning of the only truth that matters. I am free. Thanks for reading my story. If you've ever had a person show you their true colors when they thought you weren't listening, or if you've been saved by a mentor, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of survival and vindication.